Hello, my name is Michelle Tao Nguyen, and I'll be presenting with Isabelle Nepomuceno and Irina Tai. Today, we will be presenting on using a linear transducer to identify early pregnancies with respect to BMI. Our PIs are Dr. Laham, Dr. Fox, Dr. Kurzweil, Dr. Choi, and Dr. Sadat. In this study, we are identifying if a transabdominal ultrasound with a linear transducer can be used to diagnose an intrauterine pregnancy, ectopic pregnancy, or other pregnancy complication in an emergency medical setting. At this time, the standard of care when a patient is admitted to the emergency department is to order a transvaginal ultrasound or transabdominal ultrasound using a curvilinear probe. As I mentioned before, these tests are known to have great specificity and sensitivity in diagnosing pregnancies, especially those in later stages. However, these tools come with a couple of cons. It can be invasive, time-consuming, and may not be readily available in an emergency setting. Number one is the probe used for the transvaginal ultrasound, and two is a curvilinear transducer. What we propose is using the linear transducer to identify intrauterine pregnancies transabdominally. This allows for a higher frequency, which will provide better resolution and great sensitivity with respect to body mass index. And also, it is quicker and more readily available. However, the con is that if a patient has a higher BMI, they can potentially block the frequency of the ultrasound, providing less penetration. Thus, the ultrasound minimizes in its visibility. The aims and objectives. We are seeing if we can determine whether a linear transducer is a reliable tool for the evaluation of early intrauterine pregnancies, which is up to 12 weeks. We're doing this by comparing if these techniques, which is using the linear transducer performed by an emergency medical physician, or using a transvaginal or transabdominal probe performed by radiologists, we're seeing how this compares. In addition, we are seeing if we can identify the body mass index. This is a numerical value that compares the weight and the height at which the emergency medical physician can quickly identify a first trimester intrauterine pregnancy with a linear probe. At this time, we have enrolled 24 patients.
Hello, my name is Irina, and I will be presenting the methods. So patients were screened Monday through Sunday from 8 a.m. to midnight between August 2019 and March 2020 by the Emergency Medicine Research Associates Program, also known as EMRAP. The inclusion criteria were mothers in their first trimester of pregnancy, 18 years old and above, English or Spanish speaking, and with a BMI less than 35. The exclusion criteria were psychiatric, incarcerated, or cognitively impaired patients. Most patients had the chief complaint of vaginal bleeding or abdominal pain in pregnancy. If a patient qualified for the study, they were approached and informed of their role in the study. Once the patient agreed to participate, they were consented by the MRAPers by signing a Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which is HIPAA form, and the consent form. The emergency medicine physician would first perform an ultrasound with a linear transducer and then perform the standard of care ultrasound. If the standard of care ultrasound was performed first, the physician must be blinded from the results until they perform the transabdominal ultrasound with the linear transducer. The physician then filled out the data collection sheet using the results of the ultrasounds as reference. Here is the picture of the data collection sheet. The sheet consists of basic demographic questions, the BMI of the patient's last menstrual period, and the name of the ultrasonographer who performed the ultrasound. The data collection sheet also includes whether or not the patient had a presence of an intrauterine pregnancy, the number of gestations observed, whether or not the patient had a presence of a fetal heartbeat, and whether or not the patient had a presence or absence of free fluid in the abdomen.
Hello, my name is Isabelle, and I'll be presenting on the results and conclusions of this study. A statistical test was done on the collected data and interpreted for the presence of an intrauterine pregnancy. The statistical test calculated the accuracy of the ultrasound with a linear transducer, specifically how many true positive, true negative, false positive, and false negative predictions were detected by the ultrasounds. As you can see, there were 2 true negatives, 3 true positives, 10 false negatives, and 6 false positives for the detection of an intrauterine pregnancy. The sensitivity of the data was between 15.2 and 64.6%. Although the sensitivity of the data was high with 64.6%, it is not considered high enough to be used clinically. Therefore, the data suggests that using a linear probe is not viable to detect intrauterine pregnancies. Although the data was not sensitive enough to detect an intrauterine pregnancy, the data may be interpreted for different variables. The data was then additionally interpreted to detect the presence of a fetal heartbeat. The presence of a fetal heartbeat was detected in 16 patients for both the linear transducer and confirmatory study ultrasounds. The statistical test showed 9 true negative, 0 true false positives, 1 false negative, and 6 false positives for the presence of a fetal heartbeat. And the sensitivity was 99.6%, and the specificity was 100%. This suggests that a linear transducer is a viable tool to detect a fetal heartbeat. Because the sensitivity and specificity are very high, it is beneficial to conduct a future study using the same methods, but to interpret the data to detect the presence of a fetal heartbeat. This can be applied clinically to determine if a woman is pregnant in order to have her avoid receiving x-rays or other lab orders. And that is our presentation on using a linear transducer to identify early pregnancies with respect to BMI. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to our presentation, and thank you to the ultrasound team at University of California Medical Center for this research study.